when we're working with rational exponents, that's exponents that are fractions, we can rearrange them so that they show a roots problem instead. So for example, let's take a look at how to rewrite or rearrange 16 raised to the 3/2. Well, obviously if we wanted to just evaluate this and get an answer, we could type this into a calculator, but let me show you how to do this by hand. So the way this works is 16 is going to be our base. So let me start with writing the 16 down and then putting the root symbol down. In your exponent, your fractional exponent, one of those numbers is going to represent the root, and one of those numbers is going to represent the power. So what I tell people to do is just think of a tree. On a tree, where are the roots? And of course, the roots of a tree are on the bottom. So the bottom number, the denominator of your exponent, is going to be the root. So in this case, we're really working with a square root of 16. The number on top in your exponent, your numerator in this case, is going to be your power. So 3 is going to be our exponent in this case. So rewriting 16 to the 3/2, I can rewrite that as the square root of 16 to the 3rd power. And that's something that I should be able to work out without having to use a calculator. At this point, there's no order of operations. We're free to do either part of this first. I can either do the square root of 16 and then cube that answer, or I can do 16 to the 3rd power and then take the square root of that. Well, for the most part, typically, doing the square root part is going to be easier to do because that should result in a smaller number, and I know what the square root of 16 is. I have no idea what 16 to the 3rd power is without using a calculator. So I'm going to start with the square root. The square root of 16 is, of course, 4, and then I still have that raised to the 3rd power. That is, the square root symbol disappears because I used it. Once I raise 4 to the 3rd power, I end up with a final answer of 64 when I evaluate this. So 16 to the 3/2 is equal to 64. You can confirm that on your calculator if you don't believe me. If you are using your calculator, though, make sure you use parentheses around that exponent just to be safe. So 16 raised to the 3/2, not 16 times 3/2. Okay, we can do the same thing if I'm working with negative exponents. The first thing we'll want to do, though, is make that negative exponent into something positive. So if you don't remember what we did, we call it the elevator trick. I can take any exponent and change its sign by moving it up or down in a fraction. So I'm going to take that entire number and move it to the bottom, the denominator of the fraction. The 32 won't change, that base remains the same, but my exponent now becomes 3/5, positive 3/5. Well, you can't have something in the bottom of a fraction with nothing in the top, so I have to throw a 1 up top. Once I've done that, it's going to follow the same plan as what we previously did. So I'm going to rewrite this as 32. And then remember, one of those numbers in the fraction, in the exponent, represents your root, one of them represents your power. We'll think of trees, and the roots of a tree are on the bottom, so the bottom number is going to be your root. So this is really the 5th root of 32 that I'm working with, and the number on top represents your power, your exponent. Oops, you can read that, right? So the 3rd power will be my exponent. Okay, and that's what I want to then work out. Again, I'm free to do this either step first. I can either do the 5th root of 32 and then cube that answer, or I can raise 32 to the 3rd power and then take the 5th root. Let's do the root part first. That's going to get you typically a smaller answer, and it's something that I can do in my head. The 5th root of 32 is 2. If you didn't know that, you can guess and check, or do the 5th root of 2 on your calculator, 5th root of 32 on your calculator. I still need to raise that to the 3rd power. Don't forget that 1 on top. 2 to the 3rd power then gets me 8 as an answer. Well, be careful, because a lot of people will say 8's the answer and they'll circle it and be done with it. But remember that 8's on the bottom of a fraction, so don't forget the 1 on top. So my answer should be 1/8 for this. If you tried doing this on your calculator, if you typed in the original 32 to the negative 3/5 in your calculator, of course your calculator is going to get you a decimal of 0.125. Now that technically is the answer because that's equal to 1/8, but really I don't want decimals, so just go ahead and if you did use a calculator, just make sure you change that back into a fraction for me. Sometimes not all of our answers are going to be nice, neat, integer, rational answers. Sometimes they're going to be irrational. Sometimes we'll just get nasty answers. So occasionally they'll say just use a calculator to find an approximate value for these. Let's go ahead and agree that 2 decimal places is gonna be what I want to round to if I do have any irrational answer. You can type these in your calculator in either format. You can type them in as these first two appear, just as a number raised to a fractional exponent. Just remember to use parentheses around there, just to be on the safe side. You could also type them in with the root and radical notation. However, I think it's probably easier to type in with just the exponent problem. So let's take this bottom one and just rearrange it. We've rearranged the other way. Let's rearrange in reverse, where we start out with the radical, and end up with the exponent. So most people realize that 7 is going to be the base, and then they well, they kind of get confused and they guess and check, or they just guess, really. They know it's either going to be 3/4 or 4/3 as the exponent, but remember, think about where the roots go in your fraction, where the roots are in a tree. So 4 is the root in this case, and again, if you think of where that where those roots are in the tree, they're in the bottom. So 4 should be in the bottom of my exponent. So this is really 7 to the 3/4 power if I rearrange it. Again, you could type it in that original format, but I think it's easier to type in with the fractional exponent. Be careful with how you write these two if you are rearranging them. If you wrote that as 7 and then 3/4, well, that doesn't look like an exponent at all. That looks like a mixed number, which is not what it is. So make sure your exponent looks like an exponent. Okay, so as I said, these ones are not going to be rational answers. We'll need to use a calculator. So let's switch over to the calculator and just make sure we know how to get these typed in and check our answers with that. When we're evaluating an expression that does not have a rational answer, we'll use a calculator to get an approximate answer. I've got answers already down here rounded to 2 decimal places, but let me show you how I use my calculator to enter this in. So to enter in 9 raised to the 1/5 power, all I'm going to do, just like I would do any exponent, I'm going to type in the 9, use the exponent key, and at this point, if you have one of the newer calculators that puts the exponent up where it's supposed to, you don't need to use parentheses. However, I'm going to, just to be on the safe side, so I'm going to use parentheses and type 1/5, or 1 divided by 5 to enter 1/5. You need those parentheses, especially if you have an older calculator that just does the exponent symbol and doesn't put the exponent up top. But once I hit enter, there's my approximate answer, 1.55, if I round to 2 decimal places. So again, for 12 to the 3/8 power, I'm just going to enter in 12. Raised to the, if you have one of these newer calculators like I have, we don't need to use parentheses. However, to be on the safe side, if you're not sure, I would just use those parentheses just in case. And so there's where the 2.54 came from. And then finally, we had talked about how to rearrange this final expression into something that has an exponent, a rational exponent. So I think that's easier to type in. So again, I'm just going to type in 7 raised to the 3/4. However, if you want to type this in the format that it's originally in with the roots, you can do that. It's just a little bit, I think, a little more difficult to type in, but let me show you how that would be done. So for example, I'm going to type in the 4, and then using the math menu, type in option 5 to get the 4th root. We looked at that in the last video. So the 4th root of 7, and then I want to raise that to the 3rd power, so I moved my symbol out of there so I wasn't underneath the square root, or the 4th root. And I can see that I get the same thing. However, I just think that's a little bit more tedious, a little bit more annoying to type in than just typing in the exponent notation.